Dear colleagues, dear students, guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and great pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of our Dean, Dr. Jiří Mrázek, at this extraordinary guest lecture, and especially to welcome our guest, Dr. Horiacha, from the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, at present staying at the Masarykovy University in Brně. The title of our today's lecture, Churches in Ukraine, Past and Present, sounds like a descriptive, neutral, impartial. The context of these days, however, makes it sound unambiguously involved, keen on the topic, like a word into sharp conflict. We are all aware that Dr. Horiacha's very presence among us today is not at all neutral and self-evident. After February 24th this year, when Putin's Russia escalated its long-term aggressive policy towards Ukraine into an open imperial war, none of the citizens of Ukraine can be sure of their safety and their lives. In the last 2 months, over 11 million Ukrainians, that's more than the entire population of our country, have had to flee their homes, and over 5.5 million have already fled abroad. This is the context in which we are gathered here today, and we hardly understand the depth and the consequences of this conflict yet. But in any case, we have to try to be informed, to understand, and to act in solidarity. Dr. Horiacha, we very much appreciate you for accepting our invitation and for sharing your time, your knowledge, and your experiences with us today. And we are looking forward to your lecture that you prepared for us. Before you start, I would like to ask Professor Lenka Karfíková to take the floor and to introduce shortly your professional background and academic profile.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure as well to introduce Maria Horiacha, whom I know is colleague working in the field of patristic studies. She is actually connected or working at the Catholic University of Lviv. It is her home region as well. And she is now in Brno for several weeks or months even. Her specialization are above all the Greek church fathers like Pseudo-Macarius Simeon or Evagrius Ponticus. Or currently she is working on Athanasius, like our colleague Vyacheslav as well. And she is preparing a volume containing the both very important writings by Athanasius on the Nationes and the Incarnatione by Athanasius of Alexandria in Ukrainian translation, commentary, and introduction. So it is their current work in Brno, in fact. She also is editor-in-chief of this series where this volume should appear of patristic texts. They, as she mentioned, they already have some 7 or 8 volumes, so it is something like we have in Oikomen Dream series probably. And Maria is also, which can be important for her lecture today, is the expert for the theological department at the Patriarchal Curia of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. So she is a kind of advisor of her bishop, her Greek Catholic bishop. So it is our special pleasure to have her. But I have forgotten to mention, she studied in Belgium, in Leuven, where he obtained her PhD degree, writing on Macarius Simeon with Professor Johann Lehmann, probably some of them know him. And she also published her doctoral thesis, of course, Ukrainian and in some articles in English as well. So it is our pleasure to have such a competent person to speak us about the situation of churches in Ukraine in their past and present. So Maria, please. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. Thank you, Vice Dean and Professor for that nice presentation. First of all, before I started my lecture, I would like to express my high appreciation to all the Czech people for the support and solidarity with the Ukrainian nation in this difficult time of war. I really was moved and touched by the support which I met and kindness of people that around me. It's really something very incredible. Everybody speaks about Poland that took this first wave of refugees and did so much for Ukrainians, but I think Czechs did not less. Maybe it's because the border is a bit far that we don't talk much about that, but this is really a big deal. Yeah. Now we can switch to the lecture. It's a bit long, but I will try to shorten it and to leave some time for discussion. This is just a small sketch how our lecture will look like. It starts with Christianization, then we'll shortly present the development of Kievan Metropolitanate in 10th and 16th century, then another few periods, and finally we will finish today's situation. So what we can say about Christianization? I will be talking just about traditional churches, not about old churches. I have to excuse myself, I don't speak about Protestant churches, because it's a bit different field and I'm not a specialist in that field. So my lecture will concern only Catholic and Orthodox churches. The official date of Christianization is 988. It's Volodymyr the Great, that is Kievan Rus. But actually there was some Christians even before, which we know from the chronicle of bygone years. We have a nice legend about Apostle Andrew that came and pronounced a prophecy that there will be a lot of churches in Kievan hills. Of course, it's just a legend, but still, we have the story about Martyrdom St. Clement, which is very much venerated in our country, also in Czech, because of the Cyril and Methodius that found these relics in 860 in Chersones. And this is a sign that Christianity was present even before official date. Also, the grandmother of Volodymyr, Olga, was also baptized by Byzantine emperor. The official date when we can start history of Kievan Metropolitanate, it's 1037. It's the first mention of the Kievan Metropolitan. It's also the date when the nice basilica of Santa Sofia was built by Prince Yaroslav the Wise. The first 5th and 6th centuries of Kiev Metropolitanate you can divide in 3 different periods. Pre-Mongol periods, Mongol periods, and the period after division. If we talk about first period, the metropolitans of Kiev were mostly Greek, sent by the Patriarchs of Constantinople. The natives of languages were few, like Metropolitan Ilarion, or Ephraim, or Clement Smoliatis, or Cyril II. They were mostly Greek. But in 1240, Batu destroyed Kiev, after which the city of Kiev finally lost its significance as a capital of old Ruthenian state. After the conquest of Kiev by Mongol Tatars, When many churches and monasteries were destroyed, the importance of Kyiv as a spiritual center began to decline. The Kyiv metropolitans began to settle in the northern provinces and finally chose Volodymyr on Klyazma, on the outskirts of northern Rus. You can see it here. Here? See? So far north from Kyiv. Because in Kyiv was very dangerous to stay because of the Mongol Tatars invasion. Due to frequent invasion, Kyiv was no longer a secure place to stay. Therefore, metropolitans began to move further north. This, however, did not pass unquestioned, since besides Volodymyr and Klyazma principality, there was two other political centers that were rivaling for the place of metropolitan. These were Lithuanian principality and also the kingdom of Halych and Volyn. You see, this is Halych Volyn kingdom. In the middle is a Lithuanian principality, and here the northern Rus principality, which later became Moscovia. So Halych Volyn monarchs and later Lithuanian princes considered such situation intolerable that metropolitans sit in Volodymyr and Klyazma and then moved to Moscow later. And they tried to settle their own metropolitans in their places. And they succeeded for some time, but it was not. It was temporary. It was not long time. Here you see. So in 1443, the Florentine Union was condemned by Orthodox churches. After the Florentine Union, but also Kyiv Metropolitan participated. The Eastern churches refused to accept it, but it was not the case in Ukrainian territory at that time. The union was welcome in Kyiv, but rejected in Moscow. In 1448, the Council of Bishops in Moscow, without the consent of the Ecumenical Patriarch, appointed a new metropolitan. They took Kyiv Metropolitan Isidore, imprisoned him, and put instead of him Iona, Bishop of Ryazan, to be Metropolitan of Kyiv. And this event in 1448 is considered the beginning of separation of the Church of Moscovia. Metropolitan Iona died in 1461 and was the last metropolitan who had the title of Kyiv and all Rus. His successors were already called Metropolitan of Moscow and all Rus. That's a very important thing. And for 141 years, the Moscow Metropolitanate was in a state of unrecognized status until its transformation into Moscow Patriarchate in 1589. After the de facto separation of Moscow Metropolitanate in 1458, in 10 years, the Uniate Patriarch, which still were living at that time, who signed the Union of Florence. This Uniate Patriarch of Constantinople, who stayed in Rome, Gregory the Set Mammas, ordained in Rome Gregory Bolharinovich to be a metropolitan of Kyiv, Halych, and all Rus. And this day is actually the de jure recognition of division of Kyiv Metropolitanate. You can see here David's Constantinople Patriarchate and Moscow Patriarchate, which later becomes another. Here you can see Bege, Kyiv Metropolitan and Moscow Metropolitanate, which became later Patriarchate. The fall of Byzantium in 1453 led to decrease of the role of Patriarchate of Constantinople in fate of Kyiv Metropolitanate, which gradually fell into a state of extreme decline. This crisis was further aggravated into a state of real big crisis. And then it was the Union of Lublin in 1569 and formation of Polish-Lithuanian Grand Duchy, Commonwealth, yeah, sorry. And this is in worsened the situation, because Ruthenian, the Kievan Metropolitan and Ruthenian land became a part of Poland influence. And then it was not possible with Catholic state to develop Orthodox faith. And this decline needs to have some response. And the response for that was Union of Brest. So it was like Union of Brest. This is, you see, one of the creator of Union of Brest, this Hypatis Portius. And the main reasons for that were several. Of course, there was different influences like Reformation, Counter-Reformation in Europe, and they were also influencing Ukrainian situation. So the intention of Ruthenian bishops was to solve the problem of Polonization and Catholicization of the Orthodox, and to gain equality in the Commonwealth with Catholics, because they were not in the same rights, so they were lower. They also wanted to level the role of ecclesiastical fraternity, which interfered too much into bishops' affairs, and the bishop didn't like that. And also to free themselves from subordination of the Eastern to Eastern Patriarchy, because they made some chaos of that. The Eastern Patriarchate in Constantinople already was not that strong. They were traveling through the Ukrainian lands, and they making some changes, and it introduced too much chaos for that. Finally, it was solved with this union, which was signed in 1596, and this was not supported by all. Bishops were divided then. After they went, after the bishops signed in Rome the Union of Brest, then they returned home, and there was a solemn occasion. They wanted to meet on the council and to announce it solemnly, the union. And then the split happened. Two bishops refused to sign it because the views of union were different in Rome and in Ukrainian lands. This Ukrainian bishop, Ruthenian would say it better, would see it in a more independent way. And Roman, with this idea of ecclesiastical exclusivism, it was not possible for them to combine Orthodox beliefs with Catholic beliefs, and this makes a split. So 6th of October in 1596, two councils took place in Brest. One was Uniate Council with Metropolitan Rogoza and other bishops that signed union, and another with Anti-Uniate Council. Two bishops like Gedeon Balaban and Kopestensky and some pledges, they refused to sign that union and pronounced that they put anathema. That's vice versa, they put anathema on these councils. Since two bishops of Kiev Metropolitanate did not sign the union, it resulted in a new split within the Kievan Church between those who came into union with Rome, this Uniate or United Church, and those who maintained their loyalty to Constantinople, the Orthodox Church. The situation of division caused polemics between the Uniates and the Orthodox that lasted throughout the whole 16th century. Finally, in 1620, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Theophanos II, who passed through Kiev, consecrated the Orthodox bishops and fixed the situation de facto. Officially, de jure, this situation was fixed in 1632 by Genrician articles, sometimes they say Pacta Conventa or Articles of Reconciliation by Polish King Vladislav IV Vasa. Now we can see a short scheme, how it was divided. So Metropolitanate split in two, Orthodox and Uniate. And from these two parts, we have the successors like Ukrainian Catholic Church from Uniate and Orthodox Church would become a part of Russian Orthodox Church. Though both parts of Kievan Metropolitanate made some efforts towards reunification, neither internal struggle nor external circumstances were favorable to such attempt. After this division, each part of Kievan Metropolitanate took different trajectory of its development. Uniate Church suffered greatly during the years of national war, led by Bogdan Khmelnytsky, which took place under the slogan of defending Orthodox faith. Of course, with such slogan, Uniate Church have no future. So this was a big suffering, and they had big losses. As a result of some political changes and Truce of Antrusiv in 1667, the Ruthenian lands were divided between Moscow and Poland after the war between them, along the Dnieper. So the left bank, which together with Kiev was under the protectorate of Muscovite Tsar, came to the union with Russian Orthodox Church, or at that time it was Moscovian Patriarch. And the right bank, which became a part of Commonwealth, there were more favorable conditions for Uniate Church to develop, and they still remain. On the part of Moscovian rule, it was destroyed completely. What we can say about development of these two parts of Kievan Metropolitanate afterwards? As I say, the Uniate, they survive only on the right bank. The Orthodox also had some period of revival under Petro Mohyla's Metropolitan Petro Mohyla, but later they were destined to decline because of the political influences. In the Moscovia, Tsar and the political leaders, they have control on the church, over the church. So there was no chance for Kievan Metropolitanate to develop their privileges and their independence in such a political situation. So, and it was resulted in 1686. Complete subordination came instead of independent development. And at the date, Patriarch Dionysius IV issued the synodal letter. It's very important because this letter then was considered recently and revised. He granted by akrivia, what we say, the right to ordain the Metropolitan of Kiev to Moscow Patriarch. This right was gained through simony. They say they paid 2 gold coins and 340 cymbals. So it was documented in the sources. According to this letter, election of the Metropolitan of Kiev was held by bishops, clergy, and nobility of the Metropolitanate of Kiev, with the permission and by order of Ukrainian hetman. So it was like a guarantee for privileges. The Metropolitan of Kiev was to retain all his privileges, and Moscow Patriarch was only allowed to ordain the Metropolitan of Kiev, not to appoint it. The Metropolitanate of Kiev remained part of Ecumenical Patriarchate. It just was a privilege to ordain for Moscow Patriarch. It was obligatory for Metropolitan of Kiev to continue to commemorate the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople as his first hierarch in any services, proclaiming and confirming his canonical dependence on the Mother Church of Constantinople. But none of these conditions were met by Moscow Patriarchate. Less than 100 years, complete liquidation of Kiev Metropolitanate took place. After Peter I's synodal reform in 1721, when power of the Russian Orthodox Church passed to the Emperor and the Holy Synod, the right to elect the Metropolitan by free vote of Kyiv clergy was lost and passed into the hands of Russian Synod. Next year, in 1722, Kyiv Metropolitanate was elected according to a new scheme. The Synod proposed the Emperor 4 candidates, from which Peter chose Varlam, who held the throne of Kyiv until 1730. It is noteworthy that he was no longer in the rank of Metropolitanate. That's also important, but only Archbishop. Since then, the Kyiv Metropolitanate has in fact become one of the ordinary eparchy of the Russian Orthodox Church. All privileges of Kyiv Metropolitanate were revoked, the commemoration of ecumenical patriarch ceased, and gradually all the peculiarity of Ukrainian Church, singing, Ukrainian pronunciation of liturgical texts, Ukrainian printing of church book were significantly leveled. In 1770, the Synod banned the use of the title Metropolitan of Kyiv, Halych, and Little Russia, Malorossia, we say. Instead, the title of Metropolitan of Kyiv and Halych was used. Now we turn to the Union Church again to see how it developed. After the adoption of Union, the Kyiv Metropolitanate entered the sphere of Western influence, which is, on the one hand, contributed to the Church's exit from crisis, but on the other hand, led to its gradual Latinization. The Union Church also had some problems with Roman influence, and it was slowly but surely the process of Latinization took place. The inner life of Union Church in 17th, 18th century was regulated by the decree of provincial synod. Like Synod of Záznam in 1720, it was one of the main tasks of this council was to fix this Latinization, not to let it go in further, but it did not stop. In the 18th century, there is also an unstoppable process of unauthorized transition of the Latin of gentry and many faithful to the Latin rite, as a result of which the Union Church lost almost all of the gentry, all nobility. Many priests and Basilian monks also died in the troubled year of Kolyivshina. There was rebellion of peasants. Then 3 divisions of Poland came. And according to these divisions, the Union Church again lost a lot of its territory. You can see it here. This is a territory which Union Church occupied during its development in 17th, 18th century. You see the border of Ukraine here. This is the border of Belarus. You see in some here. So Union survived only in this small region. Because after the 3 divisions of Poland, Polish territory passed to the Russian influence, and all Union were destroyed and dismissed. So the Union Church survived only in the under Austrian rules in Austrian Empire. And here it receives a new impulse for development. It owed its possibility to the reform of Habsburg Emperor like Maria Theresia and Joseph II in 70s and 80s of 18th century. They're introducing a new terminology like Greek Catholics instead of Uniate, and also equating all Catholics on the same level. They put in the same level, like Armenian, Greek Catholic, and Roman Catholic. Before it wasn't the case. Roman Catholic was a privileged position. The very important date is 1707 or 8. Sometimes they say there were 3 eparchy were united in one metropoly. When in Russia, Kievan metropolitan was destroyed, was liquidated. There was no other way to continue. So, and then Rome established, say, a metropolis of Halych. It's like a separate metropolis, but still juridically it's separate. But still it's like a successor of Kievan Metropolitan, because there was a way, they were looking for a way to make it survive. We'll skip some. We'll just look for shortly on the 20th century. There's two big figures of the 20th century in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky and also Joseph Slipy. Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky was maybe the most influential figure in the entire history of Ukrainian Church and also Ukrainian nation in the 20th century. His tenure spanned 2 world wars, 7 political regimes like Austrian, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, Soviet, general government of Nazi regime, against Soviet regime. So you see, it's almost half a century. He descended from Polish nobility and made a lot of influence on almost all spheres of national life, not only in the religious life. In economics, in culture, in education, in any sphere there is something that he did. Another big figure is Metropolitan, later Patriarch Joseph Slipy. He was appointed as successor even before the death of Sheptytsky, because the time was really very difficult. There was war. He wanted to guarantee a successor, and he made it even early before his death in 1939. After the death of Sheptytsky, Joseph Slipy became a metropolitan, but actually he acted just 5 months. After 5 months, he was arrested, and 18 years he spent in prisons and somewhere in exile. And afterward, deported to Rome, and still 21 years in Rome, he had some activity. Here you see some of his biography. Then he was arrested in 1946. The Ukrainian Catholic Church ceased de jure to exist. The KGB project was to liquidate it. They gathered the, we say, pseudo-Sobor or Synod of Lviv in 1946, and pronounced liquidation of Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Of course, it did not disappear. De jure did not exist, it wasn't recognized, but underground it still existed. It was severely persecuted, and for 44 years they were underground. In 1989, when there was a movement and national renewal, it was legalized. Just a few more personality. That's the successor of Joseph Slipy, Lubachevsky. The main importance, I say, what he did, he moved his residence from Rome to Lviv. After the Ukraine got independence, he moved to Lviv and settled there as a residence. And his successor was Lyubomir Huzar, very big moral authority, which were recognized as such not only by Catholics but also even Muslims and Orthodox and other people, even atheists. Here you see the administrative structure of Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine today. See, it's now there are many more eparchies in the west, just few in the east, because the concentration of the belief is there. There is Austrian Empire. Let us turn to Orthodox Church now. The most important period is the 20th century. Not much events, not many events during the 18th century. It was part of Russian Orthodox Church. But after the Russian Revolution in 1917, the renewal started also in Ukrainian lands. And then Ukrainian Orthodox Church had 3 periods of revival. After 1720 more or less, in 40s and then in 90s. You'll look shortly on this. The first revival was there was 3 churches: Ukrainian Autocephalous Church, Ukrainian Autonomous Church, also that church, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, that was a part of Russian Orthodox Church, and also Polish Orthodox Church. Here I see the portrait of one of the main activists, like Lepkivsky, that was a metropolitan of Ukrainian Orthodox Church, who was become the first metropolitan. The problem with the church is that it was not canonical. They did not have any bishop, and they made the consecration of bishop by the relics of St. Clement, so it was not a good succession, the canonical succession. So, and sometimes they are named Lepkivsky because of the Lepkivsky name, and sometimes self-consecrated because of that. The most important church for us is the Polish Autocephalous Church. In 1924, Ecumenical Patriarch Gregory VII gave a Thomas of Autocephaly to Polish Orthodox Church. It was a part of Ukrainian churches, but because of the creation of Polish state and that they needed to have some independence from Moscow, and they were supported by state, by Pilsudski, and they gained this autocephaly from Ecumenical Patriarch. Patriarch named 3 grounds that allowed him to grant autocephaly to to Polish Orthodox Church. This is firstly the need to reconcile the church borders with new political borders. Secondly, the right of Patriarchal See to provide support to Orthodox churches in difficulty, they say. And thirdly, this may be the main reason, this is a violation of canonical rules committed. Yes, we remember about the synodal letter in 1686 that was violated, the old conditions, and that was the reason why it was the ground for granting this autocephaly. However, the Act of 1686 was not annulled by Patriarch Gregory. On the territory of Ukraine, he still recognized the legal jurisdiction of Moscow Patriarchate. It was done just recently by Patriarch Bartholomew. Then second renewal came. In 40s, when Germans came, they were more favorable in the religious life, and churches could develop, like in Soviet regime, they could not develop very easily. And then we got 2 churches. One derived from this Polish Autocephalous Orthodox Church. One of its bishop was Polycarp Sikorski, Ukrainian. They started Ukrainian Autocephalous Church in 1942. And another attempt was derived from this Moscow Patriarchate. There was Alexei Hromadsky, who also tried to create Ukrainian Autonomous Church. It was anomaly, of course. There are 2 churches struggling for independence, and they started to negotiate, try to unite, because everybody understood that it's not normal. But this negotiation, they proceeded, but they did not finish because in 1943, Alexei Hromadsky was killed. It was not an intentional association, just occasionally it was war. Nobody was warranted from death. And it stopped. In 1944, when the line of front moved west, and Red Army occupied again the Ukrainian territory, that it was not possible anymore to fight for independence. And then autonomous churches, the follower of autonomous churches, they just joined Moscow Patriarchate again, was incorporated in Moscow Patriarchate. But the bishops of Ukrainian Autocephalous Church, which had canonical bishops, they went abroad, they immigrated, and they settled abroad. First in Europe, they have several countries that they settled, and later they moved to the United States, to North America. And after that, this church played its role also in the renewal of 90s. Now we pass to the most interesting part. It's renewal of 90s, the creation of many churches is rather complicated. So it started with a movement inside the Moscow Patriarchate, inside the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Some priests wanted to separate, to to make an autocephalous church, and they managed in the 90s. They announced creation of Ukrainian autocephalous Orthodox Church, and because of that moment, Moscow Patriarch realized that it's dangerous, and they tried then to change a bit and to give more autonomous rights to these eparchies which were on the Ukrainian territory, and they make Ukrainian exarchate. They changed this exarchate to Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate with autonomous right in administration. What it means, it's not equal to autonomy. It's just something lower. But finally, after independence, the new political leader like Kravchuk became a president. He maybe not forced, but still come with agreement with the leader of Orthodox Church, like Patriarch from Moscow Patriarchate, who changed his mind, and he started promoting independence, and he pronounced independence. He came to Moscow, appealed for independence, for autocephaly, and he was judged and refused. Russia didn't want to give independence to Ukrainian Church. And afterwards he seems to obey, but he returned home and started his independent movement. They could not control him in Ukraine, and then he tried to find some way with Orthodox autocephalous church that existed, and to unite. And just to be sure, because you see, you have to skip this, so we'll show you the scheme, how it works. This is the first renewal. This is the second. And here this is one. So there were two churches. They tried to unite in 94, and it didn't work well. So, and autocephalous church again split, and many bishops, almost all of them, did not support the Metropolitan Patriarch, and they again returned to Moscow Patriarchate. And that it appeared three churches: Autocephalous Church, Kievan Patriarchate, and Moscow Patriarchate. These two were uncanonical, not recognized by anybody. Then only then one time that they are canonical and true church. And this state lasted 15 years and longer. When finally the Patriarch Bartholomew interfered, and there was organized a unification council in December 2018, and these two churches were actually three churches were united, but from these churches was just two bishops joined. The rest remained. And now we have two churches: Orthodox Church of Ukraine in the jurisdiction of Kievan Patriarchate, Constantinople, yes, sorry, and the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Actually, its official name is Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, is sometimes added, but we consider it as Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. This is just a few pictures from the Unification Council. It was run by the exarch of Constantinople, from Ecumenical Patriarch. This is a new metropolitan in the center of this church, Epiphanius, and this is a granting of autocephaly is the Thomas that's Patriarch Bartholomew signs, and then granting it on the solemn. This is a church that recognized Ukrainian Church, Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and some not recognized. Most of the churches that not recognized the Ukrainian, the newly created Orthodox Church of Ukraine, they are satellites of Moscow. Now we can turn to the situation today. When the war started, all churches condemned the war, but their positions are overshadowed by the official position of and declaration of their religious centers, like Rome, Moscow, Constantinople, and we have to consider it in complex. It's not that easy, that's not separated. And the scandalous position of Patriarch Cyril put the leader of Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, Onufrius, in a very difficult position. This is Onufrius. He cannot openly support the war. That's obvious. For it means completely to discredit himself or to lose all credibility. However, the bishops of Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, they are not of the same position. There are some which are very pro-Russian. There are some that tend to be Ukrainian. There are still some that have to do some more with intelligence service than with religion at all. So it's very different situation. But many lower clergy renounce Cyril and their pro-Russian position and stop to commemorate Patriarch of Moscow liturgically. And some of the bishops also did that. But it does not mean that they don't recognize Cyril anymore, because they're still in the union with Onufrius, the leader of the church, and Onufrius still commemorating Cyril. So it's more symbolical, but it's not real protest. Yeah? And this, of course, cannot last long, because the longer its position remains unclear, the worse for them. The more they lose the credibility and trust of faithful that suffer from the war. And then some of the lower clergy came with the initiative. They are now more than 500 that signed the appeal to the 5 patriarchs to condemn Cyril for his position, for this ideology of Russian wealth, and to condemn him as a heretic. And they collected more than 500 signatures, but none of the bishops signed, only lower clergy. And they want to get this condemnation. They still, I think, they did not submit the appeal. They just gathering and tried to do it. But still, this initiative is ambiguous. There are some good signs of that, but there's also some questions to that. For example, it's good because clergy of Moscow Patriarchate acknowledge the responsibility and guilt of their leader in resolving and continuing this war. They recognize that his behavior and rhetoric are criminal and should be punished. The clergy of the Moscow Patriarchate acknowledge that the doctrine of Russian wealth is false, and it prompts the war with Ukraine and justify it. Under such condition, the clergy, Ukrainian clergy, consider it impossible to continue to be under the leadership of Cyril. And addressing the primate, they also recognize and confirm de facto that there are no internal mechanisms to bring Horiacha to justice, to solve the problem by themselves. They need someone from outside. But still, there are some questions to this initiative. The authors of appeal pay a lot of attention to Cyril's person and action, giving the impression that what happens is his personal fault. Thus, therefore, perhaps not directly, that they diminish and do not accept the collective and systematic responsibility of the entire Russian Orthodox Church and Moscow Patriarchate, and also of Ukrainian Orthodox Church within the Russian Moscow Patriarchate. Just as it is untrue that, for example, Putin is to blame for the war, not Russians, it is also untrue that Horiacha is to blame for everything, but not the entire Russian Orthodox Church as a system. Cyril was not the only one to personally preach to the people the ideology of Russian wealth or triune Russia. They sell books about it, and they were doing lower clergy preaching on Sunday, every Sunday, about that. The author of appeals opposed the position of Metropolitan Onufrius and his colleague to the position of Cyril. So they said, our Metropolitan does not support that. But it's another question. Metropolitan Onufrius has done nothing in comparing to what he should and can do. He did not even use his membership in this council and he is a member of the Synod of Russian Orthodox Church, to solve the problem, to put the question, to force them to decide what something. He did not convene also any council within, inside Ukraine, which is also his obligation and his possibility. Even distantly, of course there can be excuse about COVID restriction, others, but still distantly, online, we can do it. So there are a lot of questions. The authors of appeal to primates to condemn Horiacha and ideology, but this appeal arose also some other questions, like have the Council of Bishops of Ukrainian Orthodox Church already revoked their decision by which they break relationship with ecumenical patriarchate? After pronunciation of autocephaly, they break because Cyril announced the conflict, yes, and they, as a part of the church, break with ecumenical patriarchate. Is ecumenical patriarchate still non-canonical for them? We don't have the answer for that. Will all this be decided after war? They are just waiting who win and then they join. Such a decision have been made yesterday. Another question: have the Council of Bishops already condemned Cyril's position themselves? They can do it inside. Or in the ideology of Russian world? No. The still speeches are sometimes manipulative. They still they're speaking about fraternal war. They don't recognize, don't exactly say that Russia is the aggressor and Ukraine is a victim. No. They still try to make it not that clear. Let me turn to position of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. It's very clear. It's both the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and the Greek Catholic Church. They fully and clearly condemn the Russian aggression and show their solidarity with people and the Ukrainian military forces and provide them with spiritual humanitarian support. However, the position of their religious centers differ. The ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew, from the beginning of the war, clearly condemned the war and expressed his solidarity with Ukrainian people. He even went to Poland to meet and give support to the Ukrainian refugees that were crossing the border. This is not the case with Catholics. There's a position of Pope. His public expression and messages are ambiguous and unsatisfactory. Most Greek Catholics were very disappointed, and not only Greek Catholic, actually all Ukrainian nation and many all Catholics, by his behavior and declarations, as they expected from him more decisive condemnation of Russian aggressions. Instead, they hear only uncertain appeals to reconciliation of both sides of the conflict, not the war, but conflict. It's also the question of terminology. As if the two sides are equally responsible for the war. After the Bucha's massacre, the Pope said, everyone is guilty. Again, we will talk about. So Pope then made 3 steps. One step is the consecration of Ukraine and Russia to Immaculate Heart of Mary. Second step, there was this famous Way of the Cross, and there was third step that he cancelled his meeting with Cyril, it's just coming in June. Maybe I concentrate on the first 2 because time is short. So his act of consecration of the Russia and Ukraine to the Immaculate Heart of Mother of God also caused a lot of questions and confusion. It might be important for the Roman Catholics in the West, but neither Russians nor Ukrainians appreciated this gesture, but rather consider it with much criticism. For the Russian people, I'm speaking about intelligent Russian, not that understand what's going on, not just watching television and repeating propaganda. For Russian people, Pope's consecrations lack sensitivity to religious feeling of the Orthodox faithful of Russia, since the devotion of the Immaculate Heart of Mary is completely strange for the Orthodox faithful and for liturgical tradition. They don't have this devotion. For them it sounds nothing. With regard to Ukrainians, Pope's act of the consecration of both Russia and Ukraine in one package evoke rather repugnance than gratitude. The prayer composed on this occasion sounds for Ukrainian even offensive. There are 2 problems with this prayer. First problem, the lack of distinction between aggressor and the victim, and putting the equal responsibility for the massacre of both sides. For this, the Ukrainian already characterized Pope as the advocate of Cain. I'm sorry for that, but yeah, it's a rhetoric that people use. The words of dedication prayer sounds for Ukrainian ear more or less like that. As I cite one of my colleagues, rewording of Pope's prayer. You Ukrainians are guilty from the beginning of this war. It was your fault that you dared to be and call yourself Ukrainian. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? You are fighting for your narrow nationalistic interests. For the sake of general peace and the good of humanity, you should sacrifice that expressive attachment to your identity and not irritate your brother, who is so majestic and powerful, whom you have angered by your selfish desire to be yourself and separate from him. Your problem is the search for weapon and military alliances. All this only deepen the sin of division and cause war. That's a prayer of Pope that sounds in Ukrainian ear. All this only, therefore, repent, Ukrainian, because you are guilty of the war. You have the same responsibility like Russians. And you will all feel as how unjust these words is. The second problem is indefinite terms and fear to call in sins by their names and point it to the aggressor and responsible one for this war. After the whole free world called this war unjust, unprovoked aggression, Russia as aggressor and Putin as a criminal, the behavior of Vatican diplomacy surprises with its uncertainty and fear of calling a spade, which is crucial in these circumstances. Another of my colleagues have a nice analogy. He said, imagine, for example, the gospel, where the names and facts are not named. Imagine that Herod, who killed innocent children, the high priest, Pharisees, Judah, who betrayed Christ, Pontius Pilate, and those who whipped and crucified him are not named. Imagine that sin is not called sin, and sinners are not called by name. What is the gospel about? It is noteworthy that Pope again did not dare to mention only one Russia as a culprit of the war. Once again, the impression is that Ukrainian cities are being plundered by some impersonal war. Both participants are being in conflict are mentioned, and Pope's call to pray for the end of fratricial war between them. And this is exactly the logic of political correctness. However, it was not Ukraine that started the war with Russia, and therefore it is impossible to equate the victim with aggressor and make them equally responsible for the massacre. The Vatican curial diplomats tried to explain this by such argumentation. If the Pope joined the choir of the Western world, Russia would claim that this is a sacred war of West against Russia. Religiously motivated wars are the West evil that must be avoided at all costs. Therefore, Pope cannot even give the impression of any involvement in the struggle against Russia, even at the cost of his own authority. Such explanation can be taken into account, but it still does not justify the lack of distinction between victim and offender. Here, that's just prayer that Pope composed, and Ukrainians proposed their version. The red line is the Ukrainian proposal, and they corrected the prayer how they want it to sound. But the criticism of this act of consecration comes not only from Ukrainians. One Polish Jesuit, Zbigniew Nosowski, in his article, comment on this situation and the position of Pope, saying that prophetic voice will be more fitting to Pope Francis in this war, and not just diplomatic. I will show you that this is a Jesuit that he said, when a prophet becomes a diplomat and thus a prisoner of the chosen role, the world suffers, because we have an abundance of diplomats and prophets are few. The prophet probably suffers as well, because he knows that as a prophet he must be ashamed of his tongue. But as a diplomat, he uses it to uselessly maintain the illusion that by not calling a cruel aggressor an aggressor, he will be persuaded to make concessions. But it doesn't work that way. Diplomacy, including that of the Vatican, is a political activity, so it is assessed by the term of its effectiveness. Meanwhile, it's useless and have no effect in that sense. Another step, very shortly, you see it's already time over. The next step, the cross of the way. There's some caricature, you can watch how people reacted. I'm finishing. How people reacted on this way of the cross. And there was the idea that to reconcile two nations, Ukrainian and Russian women would carry the cross on the certain stations. There was a prayer composed for reconciliation, and it caused so much criticism among Ukrainians, among even bishops and Roman Catholics, also Apostolic Nuncius and our Patriarch appealed to Rome just to stop this, and there's still some caricatures. And finally, they did not change it completely, but still they mitigated. They dropped the prayer and proposed people to pray in silence. So that's still, and maybe after such criticism, they also decided not to meet, not to arrange this meeting of Pope with Cyril. Just not to finish my presentation on this critical tone, few characteristics of maintenance of religious life in Ukraine. Here it is. Ukraine is mostly Orthodox. The majority of faithful are Orthodox, but it's not Orthodox country. We have a lot of different denominations there, which are living together and sometimes rival, but still they have to look for some reconciliation and cooperation. The most religious region is, of course, the West. It is 90s. The blessing of the water for Epiphany feast. To see how many people are attending. It's about 70 or even 80% that people believe. But unlike the country borders, which Ukrainians heroically defend, religious borders within Ukraine itself are not clearly defined. Without changing the denomination, Ukrainians can go to pray in Catholic Church, like Orthodox go to Catholics, Catholic go to Orthodox, even if they consider themselves different faiths. They look for difference only when the question becomes a political, they're not religious. One more thing that I want to, this is my done, yeah. I want to draw attention, this unique Ukrainian invention of interreligious dialogue is the all-Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organization. This is a special organization which was established in '96 and has no analogus in the world. This is a platform of interconfessional dialogue including all Orthodox, Protestant, Catholics, both Roman and Greek Catholic, Jews, Muslim, and other smaller denominations that represent 90% of Ukrainian religious organization. And none of this religious group dominate the assembly. The presidency is rotating, and one day it's Orthodox Church, next day it's Jews or whatever, Muslims. Whatever. As you see, Ukrainian religious institutions are deeply integrated also in the global religious context. This is a visit of this organization to Israel, and there was a presidency of the rabbi, then he invited them to Jerusalem. And just a few sentences to finish. Ukrainian religious institution integrated in the global religious context. So representatives of ecumenical patriarchate were involved in the establishment of Orthodox Church of Ukraine, not only from Constantinople, but also from North America and Canada and United States. An even more illustrative example is Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. This is the varieties, how they spread. And we see that this religious revival in Ukraine has helped the development of Ukrainian society in the direction of modern democracy, which with a strong civil society which is ready to take responsibility for the country. I have to excuse for a bit longer time that I took, but I'm ready to listen to some questions and comments. Sorry.
Thank you very much for your very rich and interesting lecture. We have some 15 minutes for discussion, so please don't hesitate to raise your questions or comments. You will be very welcome.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I have a question that is related to the non-Catholic and non-Orthodox Christian denominations. I understand the frustration you expressed concerning the response of some ecclesial authorities in the Orthodox Roman Catholic part of Christianity. I have heard some very encouraging news about the attitudes of, let's say, Russian Baptists, or actually Ukrainian Baptists, much less connected with this diplomatic political correctness and trying to make everybody happy. I think that voice might deserve more hearing, especially if it sounds kind of more encouraging in terms of naming the nature of the conflict and being, from what I have heard, more clearly against the Russian invasion into Ukraine than some of the larger ecclesial bodies. So, would you comment on that, please?
Yes, to my knowledge, I see some discussion even among my colleagues and friends who are Baptists, who are Protestant. They have a big fight with Russian Baptists. They are also Russians. They also are victims of propaganda. They don't support, and they don't express this feeling of real understanding of what is going on in Ukraine, and they support Russian policy, and it caused a lot of pain for Ukrainian Baptists, for example, that they try to convince and to say that that's not correct position, but they face it like dumb fair. Here it's not possible to convince them. They just stop even contacts. It's really painful, but it's a case. That's the only maybe comment I can say. Most of religious organizations, like for example, the most clear condemnation of the war came not from traditional churches, but from Jews. The Jewish rabbi, he said so strong sermon about that. It's incredible that he was so touched and he supported Ukrainian forces against Russia. So I'm not sure that I answered your.
Yes, thank you. I just had in mind the statement of Russian evangelicals being against the Russian invasion into Ukraine. And it sounded kind of encouraging, given the situation you are describing. I know they are divided, it's not a unanimous support of Ukraine and criticism of Russia, but at least the document I read, signed by some Russian Protestant leaders, sounded as a sign of hope and more courage, let's say.
I agree.
Yeah. So
I agree. Yeah. There are some different positions, but it's not that all people support that. There are some that support war, some condemn war. It's a question of each personality. It's not the question of that we can divide this. This chair support, this not. It's always a different position. It's not. But thank you for commenting.
Yeah, I have a question about history. I don't know if I missed it earlier, but you were talking about the autocephalous, Church of Ukraine, and the ecumenical patriarch. But I wasn't sure where the ecumenical patriarch currently operates, considering Constantinople is no longer, it's now under Turkish Republic, right? And prior to that, it was under the Ottoman Empire. So I didn't know where his, so to speak, basic operations was, considering it has been under Islamic rule for a long time.
I didn't get your question.
No, I mean, like, where is the authority of the ecumenical patriarch? Where is he operating?
In Constantinople, Istanbul.
Oh, he's
Istanbul,
still there?
yeah.
Okay.
He's still under Turkish rule, but still he has a big religious authority and big moral authority. Still.
So does the Turkish government recognize his authority, or?
Orthodox Christians.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think he needs much recognition of Turkish authority. Of course, they count that he is a patriarch of ecumenical patriarchate, so it's.
I mean, I'm just asking.
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
But you are right. There is a difference between his role in the economic process and his conditions in Constantinople, which is really very difficult to survive. Yes, please.
Thank you for your very, very interesting lecture. There are many things to think about. What's interesting, especially for me, is this question of diplomacy and prophetic speech, so to say. I would like to know your personal position to this gesture in Rome, where, as you showed the pictures, where these two nurses, Ukrainian and Russian lady, were to be together. They are friends, in fact, living in Rome, and they were finally just in silence under the cross. And for me, this was a powerful symbolic gesture of possibility of reconciliation. But as I know, there were some reactions to it among Ukrainians that I understand emotionally in their situation. I think we all must understand it, but on the other hand, to show the possibility of reconciliation and to show that not all the Russians are in fact perpetrators, and that they also want to condemn war, and there are many of them. Of course, we cannot change the way the Russian state works, but in fact they are existing, and we must hear them and we must know about them. So I think this is for me important, and I'm a bit sad that the reaction to it probably was even among Ukrainians was negative. But as I say, I understand it perfectly in this situation. I cannot say a word against it, but so that's just
Thank you for your question. About my personal consideration, how I see this gesture, we can consider it in two different levels. On the religious level, on the political level, there are some others level. So if you watch, from a religious point of view, we can say that we are all called to love each other, that we have to see God's face in other people, so we have to love our enemies, but we cannot love enemy who didn't repent. Now aggressors, they appear like a supporter of evil side. They don't belong to the kingdom of heaven because they are supporting evil. And without repentance and recognizing this guilt. We cannot see in them, it's very difficult for Ukrainians actually to see in them this image of God. We know it there, so yes, but religiously we can say, yes, we have to try to live together. There was one experience, for example, in the monastery. There is different nations, and the war between the two nations, where the two representatives lives together and have to love each other, but they are hating each other. But it's maybe to show this love gives it cancels all the conflict. But this is a special place to show it love, and I think before this love is shown, there should be a clear position of both sides to stand on the right side, on the side of good, not evil. And there is no such gesture from the side of Russia. We don't know actually what is the position of both women. Did they condemn the war, the Russian women that were carrying cross? Did you hear that she condemned the aggressor war? I did not. That's the problem. I think, and Ukrainians are not protesting against the reconciliation. What they really criticize, this is politics of unclear expressions. That's a post-politics that Roman Vatican Curia is doing. That's betraying our identity, our faithfulness to Vatican. And that's the most painful for Ukrainians. Of course, nobody would break with Rome because of that. There was some suggestion from Orthodox, if both took such not popular position, so you should switch and united with Orthodox Church of Ukraine, will be one church, everything was perfect. It doesn't work like that. Popes, they are human, they also can make mistakes, and it's not what is expressed publicly, it's not the personal position of Pope, it's a Vatican diplomacy, which he's dependent on also. That's my interpretation probably of the situation. So the first step should be recognition of evil and repentance, and afterwards can be reconciliation. But without repentance, you cannot put victims and aggressors together and say reconcile. There should be some steps before, and that was the question, that the Vatican practice consequences. And it's really very painful if the people under bombing, under shelling, missiles come, fall on them, and they see how Pope tried to reconcile it. There's no way to reconcile if there is no repentance of evil side. That's maybe my opinion. I'm not sure. But I'm not against reconciliation. I'm supportive. But first, we have to finish the war, and then it will be a long process. It was also the case with Polish nation. We have a lot of conflicts, pains, wounds. A long time we could not forgive each other. And during the Second World War, there was a lot of killing and many people hating each other. But there was a long process, intentional, from both sides, from the Polish Roman Catholic Church and Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. The leaders of two churches met, they made a program and several steps to reconcile two nations, and it worked. You see, now it's the best friends of Ukraine, Polish people. So, but healing from wounds doesn't come so easily. You need time for that. And I think to forgive Russians, we need several generations. This sounds maybe not very hopeful, but new generation should come that don't remember what was done. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask, does the Ukrainian Orthodox and Catholic Church, do they see like the eventual missionary work there as some or like a danger? Because, for example, I know that the missionary activity has increased over the last years, like substantially, especially from the American church, especially from like Reformed church and so on. And the Reformed church especially has, well, not good opinion when it comes to the Catholic Church and Orthodox Church as well. So I'm kind of curious if they see this problem.
Excuse me, also, was not the question. Was I don't get the question.
Oh, yes. If the Ukrainian Catholic and Orthodox Church, if they see the evangelical missions, especially, let's say, from the Reformed churches in America, as some kind of problem, because especially.
No. We have more than 100 different denominations. We are multi-confessional state. This is also unique. In Europe, usually there is majority, there's one confession or two maximum. In Ukraine, you see, even Orthodox and Catholic, they are more than two. And there is still a big minority of Muslims, 2 million in Crimea. Jews, Armenian Orthodox Apostolic Church, there is Protestant churches, different denominations. So and it's not possible for one church to be, say, the main, and the others is just they have equal right to develop. It depends on how they work, how successful they are of this mission. Nobody would prevent from mission of evangelical or any other. So you're just free country. You can, if it's not like a totalitarian sect, no problem. You can continue. You can proceed. No problem. For example, Roman Catholic Church, it was not that present much before, but after the 19th, it's present almost everywhere. Maybe not that numerous, but still, they tried to develop, and it worked. Also, Greek Catholic Church, it was consecrated in the 3 small regions. Now it's global. It's the whole Ukraine. They moved to the east, the center, the south. They made the eparchies and other cards. Now they are present everywhere. So it's the same as Protestant church, it's different.
And for one more question, and if not, I would just ask Vyacheslav Litvinenko, who is our colleague from Ukraine as well, from the eastern part of Ukraine, whereas Maria comes from the western part. So what's your impression? Would you like to make a comment on this?
Well, it's hard to add anything after such a splendid presentation that Maria did. I just want to express my gratitude for the things that I have experienced as a Ukrainian coming here from Donetsk. Just before I finished my PhD here back in 2014, I already had no place to go back to because Donetsk Christian University, where I worked for 7 years, was seized as one of the first things there. So I stayed here for a couple years as a postdoc, and then I had Gotcher for other years. So I have experienced this care from the Czechs firsthand, so to say. And I really appreciate the way the Czechs are responding to what is going on in Ukraine right now. And I appreciate Maria sharing with us today. For the last 5 years or so, I have been working with quite a few Russian colleagues. Those who know me or what I do know that I work with the Slavonic manuscripts, and I work with the issue of the reception of patristics in the Slavonic tradition. So right now, as a scholar, I'm seeing my colleagues in Russia being arrested, being put down in their positions. One of them is now on his way to Armenia because he can no longer work in Nizhny Novgorod. So I can identify with someone who asked about whether there is a voice in Russia about the situation that is going on in Ukraine. There is a voice, and despite the fact that there's not many people who are making that voice, I think it is a strong one there. So I appreciate that. I'm now on the list of those who is no longer able to order copies of manuscripts from Russia. I tried 6 times now, and every time I did that, they would say, "You are from Prague," or "You're from Ukraine," or things like that. We don't work with such people. So you can see that tension and that atmosphere there. I just appreciate the fact that we here are so much in solidarity with those who suffer in Ukraine, and that we support each other, and I'm the one who has experienced it, and very grateful for that. So, thank you.
Thanks to Maria, of course, for the wonderful lecture. Thanks to our faculty, which made it possible on this occasion, and thanks to all of you for coming and listening and questions. So, thank you again.